What we're saying, team, we're all good. This training is going to be about Hyrox training for elite athletes. For those of you that have watched the Hybrid Summit kind of seminar, the one that's on our YouTube channel, which was about novice training for Hyrox. This is going to showcase the difference in novice and beginner Hyrox athletes or first time Hyrox athletes to more advanced, more experienced, more elite level athletes and the different kind of training approaches and the things that we can actually do as a more experienced or as a more experienced or elite kind of Hyrox athlete. These are the things that we could do. All right. So buckle in and enjoy it. So different phases of training. I always like to break up the entire year into 4 different cycles, maybe even longer than an entire year. I'm a big fan of really emphasizing the importance of a general physical preparedness phase within reason, of course, but the longer you can stay in a general physical preparedness phase where we're pushing absolute strength and absolute fitness, so your aerobic ability, the better you're going to be come competition season, right? I'm a massive fan of it. Your aerobic ability and capacity, if you will, so the volume and intensity that you can actually you can manage, that's capacity, that's work capacity. Your aerobic ability underpins all fitness. If you are physically unfit or not as fit as you could be, you're not able to run as fast as you're able as you possibly could. You're not able to recover as best as you possibly could, which can then impact session frequency, session quality, not only from the endurance side of things, but also on the strength side of things. Because if you've just done, threshold efforts, for example, or a sub-threshold effort kind of session, you're going into like an upper body kind of strength and hypertrophy session. If your fitness isn't where it could be, or you've neglected or skipped a general physical preparedness phase or shortened it, then your recovery capabilities may be decreased from going from a hard effort session to a kind of strength session. Your CNS system, your muscle fibers, and your recovery capabilities just aren't going to be there. So your aerobic fitness underpins absolutely everything. And you've probably heard me say this multiple times, but strength is never a weakness, especially in the sport of Hyrox. The stronger that you are, the better you're going to be able to handle those stations. So you're going to be able to go through the sled pushes and pulls and the lunges and the wall balls at a quick pace with less effort because your top end strength is better, right? I know a lot of kind of coaches and things like that like to say Hyrox is endurance and muscular endurance kind of race. It's not. It's a hybrid fitness race. The stronger and fitter you are, the better you're going to be. Hence why you look at Hunter McIntyre, stronger and fitter than everybody. Michael Sandbach, who's number 2 guy in the world right now, got fitter and got stronger. Alex has a massive aerobic kind of ability, capacity, if you will, because of his swimming background. And in his general physical preparedness phase, his off season, he put on a lot of strength. He put on a lot of strength, and now he's the current number 1 in the world. So those are just kind of prime examples. It's not a muscular endurance event. If you improve your top end strength, you're going to be able to handle those stations a lot easier. All right. So the longer we can actually stay in a general physical preparedness phase, pushing aerobic fitness, pushing absolute strength, the better you're going to become pre-season and peak phases and things of that nature. All right. The second phase that you transition from a general physical preparedness phase would then be a build phase. All right. Your build phase is just similar to a general physical preparedness phase, but what we might do is bring in a little bit more specific work. We might start working on your threshold ability, maybe some top end speed work, for example. We may start doing that in your build phase, right? So we get a little bit more specific, a little bit more volume, or a lot more volume, depending on the athlete. We'll go into this build phase from your general physical preparedness phase. So this build phase is where a lot of uh your fitness will really improve, because we're not just working on your aerobic fitness, we're working on sub-threshold efforts, we're working on absolute top end speed, and then we're working on some specific kind of Hyrox focus work, like we bring in the sleds, for example. We're bringing maybe some wall balls, we're bringing some heavy lunges, for example. We'll start looking at that. And then what we'll do is after a build phase, we then transition into a peak phase. A peak phase is where a lot of the specific work will come in. Now, a peak phase is, in my opinion, is never really a set time period. I kind of like to do anywhere between 3 to potentially 8 weeks, just depending on individual athlete and what they need and how much time they actually need to to work on the qualities that's going to take to become really, really race ready and to peak for that event. So that's never a set phase. Like any of these phases, they're never really set in stone. I know a lot of people will like to say, right, each phase is going to be 4 weeks. Sometimes it's not. Take me, for example. My general physical preparedness phase was 8 months, something like that. Yeah, close to eight, probably 9 months, closer to 9 months. My general physical preparedness phase was. So that just shows you it's not like a set 4 week kind of phase or anything like that. My peak phase, my personal peak phase leading into Birmingham has been about 4 or 5 weeks, something like that. So again, it really just depends on the athlete and the time that they need to really, really get race ready and where they're at in the season. Is it an A race that we're looking for, or is it just a season opener to see where we're at so then we can peak again for an A race later on down the line? It really just depends. But a peak phase is where we bring in a lot more specific work, a lot more specific run work, tailored and designed for Hyrox. And then obviously we start looking at the Hyrox kind of station components as well, start looking at transitions and things of that nature. All right. And then probably the most overlooked phase in any athlete's kind of mesocycle, if you will, is a recovery phase. People go from a peak phase, they compete, and then they go straight back into a general physical preparedness phase, or they don't even know what that phase is. So then they go right into a build phase because they've overbooked their season and they've got a race in another 2 weeks or 4 weeks time. So if you map out your season correctly, we should circle these phases quite frequently. All right. So your recovery phase is very low volume, and intensity work is general kind of movement practice, getting the body moving, keeping the body moving. Might do a lot of kind of off the feet capacity work, a lot of bike rides, swimming, and things of that nature. But the whole aim of that phase is just to get recovered so that you can then again peak again for a next race. All right. So general physical preparedness phase, some of the kind of key things here is generally like a 50-50 training split. So 50% of your weekly training volume or your training sessions, I should say, will go towards strength. And then 50% will go towards more endurance work. It tends to be that. That's the way I kind of like to structure it anyway. Because with the general physical preparedness phase, we want to improve both qualities in terms of absolute endurance and absolute strength. All right. So a big focus on improving aerobic, a big focus on improving your aerobic performance alongside some top end strength. So air quotes, hashtag hybrid. All right. We may add some specific work in there. Again, a lot of people like to push some heavy slides and pull some heavy slides. I understand that just from more of a confidence kind of standpoint. So I do understand that, but we may add in some kind of specific work. Just depends on what the athlete actually needs. But it wouldn't be at any sort of meaningful, like massive high volume and intensity, any sort of like real big work capacity where it's going to tax you all too much. Like the aim and the intention and the purpose behind the general physical preparedness phase is to build aerobic fitness and to build top end strength. We may dabble some specific work in there, but that's it. I'm a big fan of adding in like ski and row, for example, because that works on well, one, it's off the feet capacity, so it's not going to tax you as much as what high volume running will do. So it's great from that element, but also that kind of power development and power endurance, if you will, being able to sustain hard bouts for a longer period of time. The ski and the row, the urge are fantastic for it. So that's where we may add some specific work in there. But again, we're not doing 100 wall balls or anything like that in a GPP phase. All right. Your build phase, again, something like a 50-50 or a 60-40, 60 being more on the side of endurance rather than the strength side of things. But again, this does depend on the athlete. If the athlete has come from a kind of track and field background, for example, or a running background, and they lack the quality of like real top end strength to be able to be really, really good at Hyrox and dominate those stations, then it might be a 60-40 split on the strength side of things. That's a kind of special case. If that was the case, if we got an athlete who was on the weaker side but faster, I would still lean towards more of a 50-50. If it's 6 sessions a week, for example, it would be 3 towards endurance, 3 towards the strength side of things. So we're not losing any sort of kind of running ability or endurance ability by pushing too much volume into the strength side of things. So that's the way I personally like to do it. But with a build phase, it is very similar to a general physical preparedness phase, an increase in total weekly volume. On the endurance side of things, like what I just said, an increase in intensity and frequency. So in a general physical preparedness phase, we may add in 1, maybe 2 kind of harder effort sessions over a 10 to 14 day period, something like that. Just so it's not mind-numbing endurance, like steady state, zone 2, zone 3, runs that we're doing. We do spice it up just maybe a little bit with your GPP phase, but with a build phase, we'll probably look at incorporating 1 to 2 every 7 to 10 days. So the frequency of intense sessions and threshold efforts, for example, will increase, which will then obviously bring the training intensity for the week up as well. We bring in more off the feet work, so a lot more bike work, ergs, potentially even some swim sessions, just to help push more aerobic volume in without absolutely cooking your CNS system. Not everyone can handle high miles of running, so this is where bike sessions, swim sessions, erg sessions are fantastic, because we can push 30, 40, 50k on a bike and not be absolutely cooked like what we would be running 20, 30, 40k in one bout in one session on the feet. So we can really ramp up that aerobic volume, and that's the purpose of this build phase, is to build upon your general physical preparedness phase. Still keeping top end strength and volume where it needs to be, still quite high. And again, because we're having more off the feet capacity work in sessions, it shouldn't, as long as recovery is there, it shouldn't impact your strength work, because obviously session order and priorities and things of that nature, pushing both qualities, it shouldn't interfere if we've obviously planned it right, which I like to say I do that, and your recovery is on point as well. All right. Now, the biggest change in terms of the way the program design is between that build phase and that peak phase, because a lot of this kind of peak phase, depending on the length of time that you're going to be in this phase, 3 to 8 weeks, for example, a lot of the volume needs to go towards specific work. Excuse me, looking at skill development and things of that nature, looking at specific run work that's actually tailored towards Hyrox. So we're not doing any sort of we're not doing as much aerobic work, because we've already built that aerobic base over 2 phases of training. So we can then drop the volume, and we should then drop the volume. This is where I think a lot of athletes and coaches go wrong. A lot of coaches obviously get it right as well, and a lot of athletes get it right, but we do see it specifically in the Hyrox kind of space right now, is they start ramping up their volume when they're a month out, 6 weeks out from competition. You shouldn't be doing that. Your volume should be dropping, because the intensity is going to be ramped up. You've already built the fitness. You're not going to then lose fitness by doing threshold efforts or interval sessions or anything like that, or sub threshold work. You're not going to lose fitness because you've lowered your aerobic volume. That's one of the biggest lies that anybody could ever tell you. So a lot of this peak phase is going towards Hyrox components, like the station components, looking at the qualities needed to be very, very good at ski, at the sleds, at burpees, at the row, at the farmers carries and the lunges and the wall balls. We start looking at the individual qualities that needed to then be really, really good at those stations. We design your strength work or your resistance training work specifically to improve those qualities. So a lot more plyometric work, a lot more top end lower body strength work, a lot more hinge patterns in there, squats, RDLs, deadlifts are going to all help ski. They're going to help your sled push. They're going to help your sled pull. They're going to help your lunges. They're going to help your wall balls. We start looking at building shoulder volume up to help, again, your wall balls. We start looking at improving your vertical pulling strength to help the sled pulls, to help the farmer's carries, to help your row, to help your ski. All those individual qualities, we start designing your strength program and your resistance program tailored towards that. So it's no longer just general strength. It's looking at specifically improving the qualities needed to then be really, really good at the stations. In the qualities from a running standpoint, Hyrox is a threshold running event. All right. So we need to improve your threshold ability. So we start looking at how you can run on lactate, for example, your body's ability to just continue to keep running on fatigued legs. How do we do that? Do we do hill repeats into a threshold effort for 20 minutes? That's something I do. It's fantastic. Do we look at like more compromised running side of things? Do we do heavy sleds into hard 400-meter efforts, for example? Do we start looking at max effort, like 300-meter ski into a kilometer run, for example? We start looking at all these things. But again, this will come down to the individual athlete and what they really, really need. All right. Your training split will kind of look like a 70-30, or depending on the athlete, again, an 80-20. So 70 or 80% going towards the endurance side of things, and the 20 to 30% looking at the strength side of things. So it's just general strength volume brung down to a minimum effective volume, and with a big increase in specific work, like what I've just said. When we look at the qualities needed to really be good at the stations and the Hyrox component, aerobic volume decreases in threshold, and speed work obviously increases, and simulation type sessions as well, just to work on transition, the smoothness, cadence, and rhythm with wall balls, with your burpees, for example. Start looking at like race strategies with the ski erg and the row, because one of the biggest mistakes with them is everyone treats it, or the majority of people treat the ski as a 1 kilometer max effort station. It's not. We should be doing them in intervals. I believe anyway. We should be doing them in intervals. We should be looking at 250 really hard effort with 150 at relaxed effort, repeat until done. That's what we should be doing. We shouldn't just be like, right, let's go absolute send it for 500 meters, and then you're just holding on for dear life for the other half. We should be breaking up, and we look at this stuff within each kind of peak phase. We start looking at that transitions and things of that nature, and then just getting the body used to that stimulus, that race day stimulus, high heart rate, lactate in the legs, heavy legs. We start looking at things like that. And that's your peak phase. So it's a big difference between your build kind of phase and your peak phase, as it should be. All right. And in your recovery phase, again, pretty simple here. It's just a 50-50 split. Again, this will be like where your volume's at the lowest, but this is also, if we're not injured, of course, your recovery phase is a very short window in your entire training cycle, if you will. It's very short. We should be in and out within, I don't know, 4 weeks, and we get back into general physical preparedness phase or a build phase again, just depending on how well your season's mapped out and the time we've got between races. All right. So it's just general movement practice and strength work, rehab work if we need it, and then we eat. We've got to eat within this recovery phase, because during the season or in pre-season, for example, there may be body composition kind of goals that we've trimmed down or become a little bit lighter, or we've put on a little bit of muscle, for example. It could be something like that. So within this recovery phase, it's nothing about body composition, trying to get race ready or fight ready, for example. It's the case of bring your calories right up to surplus or in a maintenance phase, recover as best you can, so you can get out, get healthy, and then get going again and building your next block of training. All right. And then the difference between elite athletes and novices, and here's 4 kind of key things here. Let me just move my arse over here. I'll put myself down here. So 4 things here. Work capacity. Elite athletes can handle more workload due to more experience and skill set. So that's probably the biggest difference between elite athletes and novices: the amount of workload that you can actually recover from, and the kind of, if you will, session qualities. We can increase the volume with threshold efforts and your aerobic stuff. We can put some more strength work in there. We can put more specific work in there just because you're a more experienced athlete. And so we're able to do that with a novice. And I would, again, if you've not watched the seminar about novice athletes, it's, a general physical preparedness phase followed by a taper is good enough and should be the approach that a novice athlete or first time a Hyrox athlete should take. It should just be about building strength and building fitness with a little bit of speed work or threshold work in there. With obviously an elite athlete, it's different. We go through proper cycles of training. Sims, yeah, I think novice athletes, beginner athletes shouldn't be doing simulations. I understand, and I did say this in the seminar before. I do understand why beginner or novice athletes or intermediate athletes do simulations, regardless of the level of athlete that you're at. I personally am just not a fan of doing simulations. I'm really not. I don't understand why you would test before a race. Eddie Hall never pulled 500 kilo before he pulled 500 kilo in competition. Hafthor Bjornsson never pulled 501 kilo before he pulled 501 kilo with the record that he broke. Usain Bolt never broke the 100 meters before he broke the 100 meters in the Olympic Games. You shouldn't, in my opinion, you shouldn't be tested before races. I'm just not a fan. But elite athletes or higher level athletes, more experienced athletes can get away with it because their recovery capabilities are so much greater than what a beginner or a novice athletes are. So if you are going to be doing, and I know a lot of us are, or some of us in the team are going to be doing simulations throughout the season, as long as we can plan it in advance and do it and do it in a productive way where we've got time to recover before races and stuff, then it's fine. So I do understand why it is a confidence builder. It does give us the data that we need, but in my opinion, it doesn't matter if you're even in an affiliated gym, it still doesn't give us the accurate data that you're looking for and that's going to replicate race day. It's just not. And that's why I don't think testing before we actually race is a good thing. You'll never see me do a simulation. Never. Because I've never done one. Since I've taken Hyrox a little bit more serious, I've never ever done one, and I just won't do one. But again, I understand why. Race strategy session, so we can start looking at that. We can start pushing, like for example, we can start pushing like the first half of the session, first half of the race, for example. So we look at 4K of running, with the ski, both sleds and the burpees, and we start looking at that data there. We can look at running 4K and then doing the last four stations and then running 4K, for example, to see the time difference in your running. We can start looking at sessions like that. Again, because of the recovery capabilities of a more experienced elite athlete, we can test these things. And that's how I would personally like to test athletes rather than doing a full simulation. And then fueling strategy. I don't believe novice athletes or beginner athletes need to do or will need or require fueling strategies. If you look at where they're at in their journey, doing a carb load and getting their carb timing and intake down to an absolute T isn't going to make it's not the biggest things that are going to make the biggest difference. It's their training consistency and adherence to that that's going to make the biggest difference. When it comes to elite athletes, it's the little 1% stuff that we need to really make sure that we're maximizing. We need to make sure that supplementation is in order. We need to make sure that we're not in a deficit of energy, that we are feeding into the race so that we are replenishing, so we have topped up glycogen storage, that our carb intake is where it needs to be. All those things are going to make the difference when it comes down to elite athletes. It really, really is. It can be the big difference between you winning a race, winning an overall race, qualifying for world champs, or completely bunking after the burpees. It makes a massive, massive difference. There is a training up in our YouTube channel which looks at the science behind creating like the perfect diet. Now the carbohydrates that I suggest, the carbohydrate calculation, sorry, that I suggest in that training it looks at like 8 to 12 grams of carbohydrate per kilo body mass. That's like the top end. That's if you're going to be doing like a massive endurance built, like a marathon or an ultra or something of that nature, or a triathlon, for example. With a Hyrox, we can look at 4 to 6 grams per kilo body mass. Then you're going to be topped up then. So that's what I would start looking at there. But that is essentially how you would periodize your training throughout the year or years to peak yourself for um, for Hyrox and for being at the upper end of Hyrox, so world champs and above, placing at world champs, trying to win a world title, trying to get into the Elite 15. This is how we look at really, really peaking and maximizing your performance. This is how we train for Hyrox. It's not about doing simulations all year round and pushing sleds all year round and doing these kind of Metcon AMRAP style stuff. It's not that. It's strength and endurance at its core. It's strength and conditioning at its core. It's bread and butter. When you push your absolute strength and you push your absolute endurance, you're going to be a much, much better Hyrox athlete. Nobody will ever tell me different because that is the science behind Hyrox. It's not magic. It really is kind of simple on paper. Hard in practice, but it's simple on paper. So I hope this one helped, team. If it did, then obviously just message the group to say how fucking great this was. But yeah, I'll love you and leave you.